Something strange happens to many high achievers. They reach the goal, and the feeling they expected never arrives. Or if it does, it disappears almost immediately. The achievement happens, the excitement fades, the next goal appears, and the chase begins again. From the outside, the life looks most genuinely impressive, but inside, in the most private and the most genuinely unguarded available moments of the most honestly inhabited daily experience, something feels missing, something feels perpetually unfinished, something feels empty in a way that the most extraordinary quality of the most available external achievement most specifically and most persistently fails to most genuinely address. And for many people who carry this experience, the emptiness has nothing to do with the quality or the quantity of the most available success. It has everything to do with what the success was most specifically organized to replace, with what the achievement was most fundamentally attempting to provide in a dimension of the most available human experience. That achievement, by its most foundational available nature, was never most genuinely designed to most adequately address. Many high achievers are not chasing success. They are chasing a feeling of worth, a feeling of safety, a feeling of love, a feeling of connection, and no amount of achievement can permanently provide what achievement was never designed to give, because the goal may never have been success. The goal may have always been connection. The most critically important available understanding in this entire examination, the understanding that most directly enables the most genuinely honest and the most compassionately adequate engagement with what is being examined, is the understanding that the experience of success, never feeling like enough, is not evidence of ingratitude, not evidence of excessive ambition, and not evidence of any most available character deficiency, whose most specifically adequate correction would most directly resolve the most genuinely present quality of the most persistently present inner dissatisfaction. It is evidence of something far more foundational and far more deserving of the most compassionate and the most honestly adequate available understanding, evidence of the most specific and the most foundationally consequential available quality of what happens when a human being organizes the most fundamental available dimension of the most real available personal worth around the most available performance quality, and then discovers, through the most accumulated and the most genuinely formative available developmental experiences of the most adult life's most thoroughly inhabited quality, that performance, however impressive, however consistently maintained, and however comprehensively adequate, in every most available dimension of the most externally accessible expression, cannot provide the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely needed available human experience, because what was most urgently needed was never the most impressive quality of the most available performance. What was most urgently needed was the most unconditional and the most genuinely present quality of the most real available worth, the quality that is available not as the most earned consequence of the most impressive performance, but as the most natural and the most unconditional quality of the most genuinely human available experience, the process through which achievement transforms from something a person does into something a person is, from a behavioral expression into an identity, is among the most gradually occurring and the most comprehensively consequential available developmental processes in the life of the high achiever. It does not announce itself. It does not generate any particular moment of recognizable transition. It happens gradually, through the most accumulated and the most consistently reinforcing quality of the most available social, relational, and psychological feedback that the most consistently performing and the most thoroughly achieving person receives across the most extended and the most comprehensively developmental available period of the most genuinely formative life experience. The grades become the identity. The academic performance becomes the most fundamental available evidence of the most basic available personal worth. The career becomes the identity. The professional achievement becomes the most reliable available measure of the most genuinely adequate quality of the most real available human value. The productivity becomes the identity. The quantity and the quality of the most available output become the most specifically legitimate and the most thoroughly justifying conditions for the most fundamental available quality of the most genuinely present sense of worth and belonging. And eventually, achievement stops being something done. It becomes who the person is. The most specifically consequential dimension of this transformation from achievement as doing to achievement as being is the dimension of its effect on the relationship with the self in the most complete absence of achievement. When achievement has been most thoroughly consolidated as the most fundamental available source of the most genuinely present sense of personal worth, when the most available performance quality has been most thoroughly established as the most reliable and the most essentially non-negotiable available condition for the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely adequate self-assessment, the experience of not achieving, of resting, of being genuinely present in the most ordinary and the most unremarkably adequate quality of the most genuinely inhabited human life, without any most immediately available performance output, becomes not merely uncomfortable, but genuinely threatening at the most foundationally available neurobiological level. Many high achievers do not know who they are without accomplishment, not in the most superficially available sense of lacking the most readily available professional title, but in the most deeply available and the most genuinely psychological sense of lacking the most fundamental available quality of the most genuinely present inner recognition that a real and a most authentically adequate self exists, independently of the most available performance quality. And the society that most thoroughly rewards the achiever provides the most extensive and the most consistently reinforcing available feedback that confirms the most foundational developmental lesson. What you accomplish is the most reliable available measure of who you are. The developmental origin of the achievement as identity pattern is located not in any most obviously dramatic or the most explicitly identifiable available single developmental event, but in the most gradual and the most comprehensively cumulative quality of the relational learning that accumulates across the most extended and the most neurobiologically consolidating available period of the most genuinely formative developmental experience. Children naturally seek connection, not achievement, not recognition, not the most available quality of the most impressively executed performance output. Children seek the most fundamental and the most genuinely present quality of the most real, available human connection, the experience of being genuinely seen, most authentically acknowledged, and most unconditionally accepted in the most complete and the most fully present quality of who they most genuinely and most honestly are. But when connection feels conditional, when the most accurately calibrated nervous system of the developing child registers that the quality of the most fundamental available relational warmth shifts in the direction of the most enthusiastically positive in response to the most available achievement quality, and shifts in the direction of the most disappointingly withdrawn in response to the most available failure quality, achievement begins to become a strategy, not a conscious strategy, not a deliberately chosen and the most explicitly organized behavioral plan, but a most automatic and the most deeply neurobiologically consolidating available adaptive response to the most specific developmental environments, most consistently communicated relational reality. Consider a child of perhaps 9 years of age in the particular quality of the most ordinary developmental moment that shapes the most foundational available layer of the relationship between the most authentic self and the concept of personal worth. The child accomplishes something. People notice, people smile, people praise, and the most fundamental available sense of being, genuinely seen and genuinely valued, is most specifically and most powerfully available. And then the child makes a mistake, fails at something, and something shifts in the relational atmosphere, not necessarily through any explicit statement, not necessarily through any deliberately communicated quality of rejection, but through the most subtle and the most reliably perceptible quality of the shift that the child's most accurately calibrated nervous system registers with complete neurobiological precision. Approval feels less certain. The most fundamental available sense of relational security feels less fully present, and the developing nervous system draws the most pragmatically available and the most survival-adequate developmental conclusion. Achievement creates attention. Achievement creates approval. Achievement creates safety. The most specifically important available nuance in understanding how this developmental learning most characteristically operates is the nuance that most families do not explicitly communicate conditional love through any most directly available verbal statement. Most parents do not say to their children, in any most explicitly available form, that love is available only when the performance meets the most available standard. Most parents are most genuinely loving in their most fundamental available intention and are most specifically unaware of the particular quality of the relational dynamic that the most accumulated and the most consistently repeated quality of the most available relational feedback is most powerfully communicating to the developing child's most accurately calibrated nervous system. The child feels it in the most genuine quality of the praise that appears after achievement, in the most specific quality of the disappointment that follows mistakes, in the most particular quality of the attention that grows most enthusiastically when performance improves and recedes most noticeably when performance falls short, and slowly, through the most repeated and the most neurobiologically consolidating available developmental experiences of this most particular quality of the most consistently communicated, conditional, relational, dynamic. The child learns what nobody ever explicitly taught them, that their value depends on what they do, that their worth is most reliably available through the most thoroughly adequate quality of the most available performance. And once that belief takes root in the most foundational available layer of the developing neurological architecture, achievement stops being a choice. It becomes a necessity. And this is where success stopped being a goal and became an emotional survival strategy. The achievement as survival strategy pattern does not express itself in a single and a most uniformly recognizable behavioral form. It expresses itself across the full available range of the human life's most available and the time most thoroughly inhabited dimensions. Through the patterns of academic achievement, career achievement, financial achievement, status achievement, and the most pervasively present and the most specifically exhausting quality of the most thoroughly maintained productivity orientation, each of which is organized beneath the most immediately visible and the most socially celebrated quality of the most available surface expression by the same most foundational available developmental premise. The academic achiever who most urgently organizes every available dimension of the most genuinely invested educational effort around the most impressive available academic performance is most characteristically organized, not primarily by any most genuinely intrinsic quality of intellectual passion, but by the developmental learning that the most thoroughly adequate academic performance is the most reliably available condition for the most genuine quality of the most fundamental available relational recognition. The career achiever pursues the most impressively adequate available career milestone because professional recognition provides the most reliable available evidence that the most genuinely adequate quality of the most real available personal worth is most specifically present and most thoroughly justified. The financial achiever pursues the most impressively adequate quality of the most available economic security, not primarily because material security is genuinely lacking, but because the most fundamental and the most urgently present quality of the developmental learning established that economic sufficiency provides the most reliable available evidence of the most genuinely adequate quality of the most real available personal value. The productivity obsession, perhaps the most pervasively present and the most specifically exhausting of all the available expressions of the achievement as survival strategy pattern, organizes the most fundamental available relationship with time, effort, and the most continuously maintained quality of the most thoroughly adequate output around the developmental learning that the most continuous productive activity is the most reliable available condition, for the most genuinely adequate quality of the most real available, permission to inhabit the most fully present quality of the most genuinely adequate human experience. Although these forms of achievement look entirely different in their most immediately visible behavioral expressions, they all share the same most foundationally identical available underlying message. I will finally be enough when I have achieved sufficiently. And once that belief takes root, life becomes an endless pursuit of a finish line that keeps moving. The problem is not ambition. The problem is asking achievement to provide what only self-worth can provide. The most practically significant available quality of achievement as a survival strategy, the quality that makes it the most specifically difficult to recognize as a survival strategy, rather than as the most authentic and the most genuinely adequate expression of the most real, available ambition, is the quality of its success. The achievement strategy works. The achiever receives rewards. The achiever receives respect. The achiever receives opportunities that the most available professional and social environment most specifically reserves for the most thoroughly performing available behavioral expression. The achiever receives validation in the most abundant and the most consistently reinforcing quality available in the most available social and professional landscape for years, often for the most extended and the most comprehensively developmental available periods of the entire life experience. The strategy appears to be working with such extraordinary reliability that the most genuinely questioning available response to its most fundamental developmental origin simply never arises. The achievement is called discipline. It is called ambition. It is called the most admirable expression of what the most available cultural understanding most specifically celebrates as the most desirable available quality of the most adequate human character. And because it works, because the most immediate and the most practically available evidence of the strategy's success is so consistently and so thoroughly present, most people never question it until the cost becomes impossible to continue ignoring. The anxiety arrives, the burnout arrives, the loneliness arrives, and the strategy that once felt like freedom begins to feel like a cage. The most specifically diagnostic available quality of the achievement as survival strategy pattern is the quality of what happens in the most immediate and the most honestly inhabitable, available aftermath of the most genuinely significant achievement's most completely reached expression. The goal is achieved. The most fundamental available sense of relief arrives, a real and a most neurobiologically present quality of relief that reflects the most genuinely adequate reduction of the most continuously present quality of the most urgently organizing performance threat signal as the most thoroughly achieved available performance quality most specifically provides the most needed available evidence that the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely adequate worth is most currently met, and then the relief dissolves almost immediately with the most specific quality of the most disappointingly rapid and the most thoroughly disorienting available dissolution, and almost immediately the most organizing quality of the attention redirects toward the most urgently available next target. For many high achievers, success does not feel like success. It feels like evidence. Evidence that the person is, at the most currently available moment of the most recently completed performance, sufficient. And because the answer is most specific to the most currently achieved performance quality, rather than most fundamental to the most unconditionally present quality of the most real, available personal worth, the answer most immediately begins to dissolve as the most urgently demanding quality of the next most available performance standard begins to most worth, specifically and most powerfully organize the most fundamental available quality of the most immediately present inner experience. Achievement is often like drinking salt water when genuinely thirsty. The more that is consumed, the more urgently the thirst returns, because the thirst was never for achievement in the most fundamental and the most genuinely nourishing available quality. The thirst was for connection. There is a most honest and the most compassionately direct quality of self-examination that belongs here, one that cuts through the most available cultural celebration of achievement. Do you immediately redirect attention to the next most urgently available goal in the most direct aftermath of completing the most genuinely significant achievement, before the most currently completed achievement has had the most genuinely adequate quality of the most honestly inhabitable available time to most specifically and most fully generate its most naturally available satisfaction? Do you find that genuinely enjoying the most thoroughly achieved accomplishment, being most fully and most authentically present in the most nourishing quality of the most genuinely complete available satisfaction with what has been most specifically achieved, is not most reliably accessible as a most genuinely present and the most fully inhabitable available quality? Do you feel a quality of guilt that is disproportionate to any most reasonable assessment of the most genuinely present circumstances when you allow yourself to rest without any most immediately available productive output to most specifically justify the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely adequate permission to rest? Do you secretly fear slowing down, not because the most available work genuinely requires the most continuous quality of the most urgently present effort, but because slowing down most specifically removes the most fundamental quality of the most reliably relied upon protection against the most genuinely present quality of the most quietly available inner questions that the most continuous quality of the most available achieving orientation has been most specifically and most successfully preventing from being most fully heard? If any of these experiences are familiar, there is a significant possibility that what has been most specifically called the most genuine quality of the most authentic available ambition is more precisely described as the most fundamental and the most urgently present quality of the most available fear, and what has been most specifically called the pursuit of excellence is more precisely understood as the pursuit of worth. There is a dimension of the achievement as survival strategy pattern that extends beyond the most internal and the most privately psychological available dimensions of the most genuinely inhabited individual experience and into the most fundamental and the most practically significant available quality of the relational life that the achievement orientation most characteristically generates. Achievement can attract admiration, it can attract respect, recognition, and the most thoroughly available quality of the most genuinely enthusiastic social response from the most available professional and social environment. What achievement most specifically cannot attract? What the most impressive and the most thoroughly maintained quality of the most available performance orientation most specifically and most powerfully prevents rather than enables is the most genuinely nourishing and the most fundamentally adequate quality of the most real available human connection. The performance becomes armor, not deliberately, not through any most consciously organized and the most explicitly chosen available quality of the most available defensive strategy, but through the most gradual and the most neurobiologically consolidating available process of the most successful performance orientation, most specifically and most thoroughly, replacing the most genuine and the most authentically vulnerable quality of the most real, available self-expression as the most reliably present and the most thoroughly organized quality of the most available relational presentation. People may most specifically know what the achiever has accomplished. Very few may most specifically know who the achiever is underneath the most available performance quality, may most genuinely know the most real and the most honestly present quality of the most authentic available self that lives beneath the most thoroughly maintained quality of the most impressively adequate available performance expression. Some people spend their entire lives becoming most thoroughly impressive without ever feeling most genuinely understood. They become admired, respected, envied, yet privately, in the most genuinely unguarded and the most honestly inhabitable available moments of the most real available daily experience, they still feel unseen in the most fundamental and the most deeply consequential available sense. The most fundamental quality of the most genuinely present emptiness is not caused by the lack of success. It is caused by the lack of connection, the inability to stop, the most specifically present and the most comprehensively organizing quality of the most available impossibility of genuinely resting, genuinely slowing, and genuinely inhabiting the most complete and the most honestly adequate quality of the most real, available stillness, without the most urgently activating quality of the most chronically present inner alarm, is among the most specifically painful and the most thoroughly privately consuming available expressions of the achievement as survival strategy pattern. For many high achievers, the fear is not failure, the fear is stillness. Because stillness, the most genuinely complete and the most thoroughly present quality of the most real available rest from the most continuously maintained quality of the most urgently present achieving orientation, leaves the most genuine person alone with precisely the most specific quality of the most urgently avoided available inner experience, the experience of the most quietly and the most persistently present questions that achievement most specifically and most temporarily silences. The questions that belong to the most genuinely adequate quality of the most real available human experience, questions about identity, about worth, about belonging, about the most fundamental and the most genuinely present quality of being truly loved as the most authentically real available person, rather than as the most impressively adequate available performance expression, are the questions that the most continuous and the most thoroughly maintained quality of the most available achieving orientation, most specifically and most powerfully prevents from being most fully heard. For many achievers, staying busy is easier than being alone with the most genuine and the most honestly present quality of the most available self. The weekends feel uncomfortable, not because the most available rest is most objectively inadequate, but because the most available rest, most specifically, removes the most fundamental quality of the most urgently relied upon protection against the most genuinely present quality of the most deeply developmental available questions that the achievement has been most specifically and most continuously managing. As long as the most urgently organized and the most fundamentally present quality of the most available goal remains most specifically in front of the most genuinely pursuing quality of the most available effort, hope remains most genuinely alive. The hope that this achievement will finally and most durably provide the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely needed available feeling that the most previous achievements most specifically failed to most durably provide. But once the goal is most genuinely and most thoroughly achieved, a most painful and the most specifically disorienting available possibility presents itself. What if this was not the answer either? For many achievers, that realization feels more genuinely frightening than any most available failure, because failure can always be addressed through the most available next achievement, but the recognition that achievement itself cannot provide what is most urgently needed threatens the most fundamental available structure of the entire survival strategy. Some achievers carry a further and a most privately consuming available fear, not the most immediately obvious fear of failure, but the fear of ordinariness. When achievement has been most thoroughly consolidated as the most fundamental available source of the most genuinely present sense of personal worth, an ordinary life can feel, to the most honestly inhabiting quality of the most genuine inner experience, like the most fundamental and the most personally devastating available failure. Not because an ordinary life is objectively a failure in any most genuinely adequate and the most honestly assessed available dimension of the most real available human experience, but because the most foundational and the most neurobiologically consolidating available developmental learning established that being exceptional was the most reliable available condition for earning the most fundamental quality of the most genuine human value. And so even peace can feel uncomfortable, because peace does not provide proof. Achievement does. The costs of the achievement as survival strategy pattern are located in the most fundamentally human dimensions of the available experience, in the quality of the most genuinely present engagement with the most ordinary and the most unremarkably adequate moments of the most genuinely lived human life, in the most authentically nourishing quality of the most real available connection with the most important available people, and in the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely present relationship with the most authentic and the most honestly real available self. Every accomplishment gives relief, but not freedom, because another mountain always appears. Another target always organizes the most fundamental available quality of the most immediately present attention. Another version of the most thoroughly adequate available self that still needs improving, still needs developing, and still needs the most available additional quality of the most comprehensively achieved performance expression to most specifically justify the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely adequate available sense of worth. When someone offers genuine praise to the person who carries achievement as a survival strategy, the most characteristically present available inner response is the most rapidly executing quality of the most immediately present dismissal, not because they are humble in any most genuinely adequate developmental sense, but because no accomplishment ever feels most completely adequate to genuinely deserve the praise being offered. The goalpost has already moved. The standard has already relocated to the next most urgently demanding available level of the most thoroughly required performance quality. And because the standard never stops rising, satisfaction never most fully arrives, and the most genuine quality of the most authentically received available praise remains perpetually inaccessible to the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely present inner experience. Many people spend years in the most thoroughly earnest available pursuit of success, when what they are actually searching for is permission to believe they were already enough before any most specifically required performance expression was most thoroughly achieved. Among the most specifically painful available dimensions of the achievement as survival strategy pattern is the dimension that becomes most directly visible in the moments when achievement is most specifically threatened, when the most fundamental quality of the most reliably available performance expression is most specifically disrupted, most genuinely challenged, or most thoroughly removed from the most immediately available dimensions of the most genuinely inhabited daily experience. For many achievers, success itself is not what most specifically and most powerfully organizes the most fundamental available quality of the most genuinely present fear. What most specifically organizes the most fundamental available quality of the most genuinely present fear is the prospect of losing success, of the most impressively adequate quality of the most available performance expression being most specifically unavailable or most completely absent as the most fundamental available condition for the most genuinely adequate sense of worth. When identity has been most thoroughly built around the most impressive and the most consistently maintained quality of the most available achievement expression, every most specifically present setback generates not merely the most ordinarily available and the most episodically present quality of the most normally adequate human disappointment in response to the most available negative outcome, but the most fundamentally threatening and the most comprehensively destabilizing quality of the most genuinely present identity threat. Not a threat to what is done, a threat to who is. Because if achievement disappears, if the most impressively adequate quality of the most thoroughly maintained performance expression is most specifically and most genuinely removed, the most fundamental and the most genuinely available question about who remains in the most complete absence of the most available performance quality has no most immediately and the most genuinely accessible available answer. The most deeply painful and the most specifically clarifying available irony of achievement as a survival strategy is the irony that achievement very often creates in the most genuine and the most privately inhabited available daily experience of the person who carries it as the most fundamental available survival strategy, the precise quality of the most fundamental available emptiness that it was most specifically organized to permanently prevent. The external achievement accumulates the most impressive quality of the most available professional milestone is most thoroughly reached. The most genuinely significant quality of the most available social recognition is most specifically present, and the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely present inner emptiness remains most specifically and most persistently present as the most genuinely private and the most honestly inhabitable quality of the most real available inner experience. Because no external achievement can permanently solve an internal wound, no most impressively adequate quality of the most available performance expression can most specifically provide what the most conditional quality of the most available developmental, relational experience most fundamentally withdrew, the most unconditional and the most genuinely present quality of the most real available human worth, available not as the most earned consequence of the most impressive performance, but as the most natural and the most unconditional quality of the most genuinely human available experience. For many achievers, staying busy is easier than being most genuinely alone with the most honest quality of the most authentically present self, because the most genuinely present self in the most completely available stillness of the most real available inner experience carries questions that the most continuous quality of the most available achieving orientation has been most specifically and the most successfully preventing from being most fully heard, most genuinely engaged with, and most honestly answered. There is a dimension of the healing process from achievement as a survival strategy that requires the most explicitly honest and the most compassionately adequate available preparation, a dimension that is among the most practically disorienting and the most emotionally challenging available aspects of genuine growth from this pattern, and that the person who is beginning the healing process is almost never adequately informed about. That dimension is the response of the surrounding relational and social environment to the earliest available expressions of genuine change. Relational systems and professional environments develop, over time, around the specific behavioral contributions of each person within them. When one person has been contributing the most relentlessly maintained over-responsibility, the most consistently delivered quality of the most thoroughly adequate performance, and the most reliably available quality of the most comprehensively self-sacrificing available productive effort, the system develops around that contribution. Some people benefit most specifically from the achiever's most characteristic behavioral expression. They benefit from the most thoroughly reliable quality of the over-responsibility, from the most consistently delivered quality of the most adequate performance, and from the most dependably present quality of the most thoroughly self-sacrificing available productive contribution. And not everyone feels genuinely comfortable when the achiever begins the most genuinely healing available process of separating the most fundamental quality of the most authentic worth from the most available dimension of the most thoroughly maintained performance. They may call the healing person less dedicated, less committed, less reliable, not because the healing person has genuinely become less valuable in any most honestly assessed available quality, but because the relationship was most fundamentally organized around the most available performance rather than the most genuine person, and what was most specifically organized around the performance most naturally feels most specifically disrupted when the performance is no longer most fundamentally driven by the most urgently present quality of the most available fear. The most genuinely transformative available moment in the healing process, from achievement, as a survival strategy, is the moment in which the most fundamental available question shifts. The question that organized the developmental experience of the child who learned that achievement was the most reliable available condition for the most fundamental available relational safety was, what more do I need to accomplish in order to finally be enough? The question that the healing process makes available is different in the most foundationally consequential available way. It is this: who am I when there is nothing left to prove? This question requires the most patient, the most consistent, and the most fundamentally experiential available process of genuine exploration. Exploration conducted not through the most theoretical quality of the most available cognitive engagement, but through the most immediate and the most genuinely present quality of the most actually lived available daily experience in the most specifically safe and the most authentically welcoming available relational contexts that most genuinely support the most gradually emerging quality of the most real available self's most honest expression. The goal of healing is not the destruction of ambition, the abandonment of the most genuine quality of the most authentically present professional and personal values, or the most thorough dissolution of the most real available passion for the most meaningful dimensions of man, the most genuinely invested human engagement. The goal is the most specific and the most foundationally consequential available shift in the relationship between the self and the achievement. The shift from a relationship in which achievement is experienced as the most essential condition for the most fundamental quality of the most genuinely adequate available worth, to a relationship in which achievement is experienced as the most authentic and the most genuinely adequate available expression of the most real available values, pursued not from the most urgently present quality of the most fundamental available fear, but from the most genuinely present and the most authentically adequate quality of the most real available passion. The reason success never feels like enough is because it was never supposed to answer the question that was most fundamentally being asked. Achievement can tell you what you have done. It cannot tell you who you are. It cannot tell you that you are most genuinely lovable as the most honest and the most authentically real available person beneath the most thoroughly maintained quality of the most available performance expression. It cannot tell you that you were enough before the most first achievement, that the most fundamental and the most genuinely real quality of the most authentic available worth was always present, always real, and always unconditionally available as the most naturally adequate quality of the most genuinely human experience, independent of any most available performance quality, any most specific achievement, and any most thoroughly maintained standard of the most impressively adequate available output. Success is not a substitute for self-love. Achievement is not a substitute for connection. Accomplishment is not a substitute for identity. And when achievement is asked to solve emotional wounds that it was never designed to address, the guarantee is that no amount of success will ever feel complete, because the feeling being sought was never most genuinely available through any most available achievement, however impressively executed, and however thoroughly sustained across the most complete and the most comprehensively maintained available professional and personal expression. If this examination has resonated in a way that feels personally significant, if the recognition of any of these patterns has produced a quality of response that suggests genuine familiarity rather than merely intellectual understanding, then there is a possibility worth sitting with in the most honest and the most compassionate quality available. The possibility that what has been spent years most urgently chasing was never success itself. It was the feeling that success was most specifically and most fundamentally expected to create safety, worth, belonging, love, the feeling that the most fundamental and the most genuinely present quality of the most real, available personal worth is most unconditionally and the most permanently available, not as the most earned consequence of the most impressive performance, but as the most naturally adequate and the most genuinely unconditional quality of the most real available human experience. And the most important available thing to remember is this: the achievement helped. It protected. It generated the most available quality of the most genuine relational resource in the specific developmental context in which it was most foundationally developed. It got you here, and what got you here deserves to be honored for exactly what it was. Not criticized, not rejected, and not dismissed. But what helped you survive one chapter of your life may not belong in the next. The child was not looking for success. The child was looking for love. The child was looking for safety. The child was looking for connection. The child was looking for the most unconditional and the most genuinely present quality of the Da, most real available relational warmth, the quality that communicates, with the most specific and the most thoroughly available quality of the most genuine relational presence, that the most fundamental quality of the most real available worth is most unconditionally present as the most naturally adequate consequence of simply and most genuinely being the most real available person in the most fully present and the most honestly inhabitable available to moment of the most genuinely shared human experience. And no amount of achievement can replace what was missing in the most fundamental and the most genuinely consequential available quality of that most formative developmental experience. The tragedy was never that success was chased. The tragedy was believing that success could give what only love could give, because maybe the fulfillment that has been most urgently searched for does not come from becoming more impressive. Maybe it comes from finally, fully, and most genuinely believing that worth was never dependent on accomplishments, that it was present before the most first achievement, and that it will remain in exactly the same most fundamental and the most genuinely real quality long after the most last performance has most specifically concluded.